How do you determine what a good YA book is? Is it a book that sold millions and millions of copies and got an adaptation that was a box office smash and was a cultural reset? Or is it a book that completely redefined what YA could even mean? I would say both of these. What I would say it definitely is not is books selected by YA authors that they think are great. Hi, hello, how are you? Welcome back to another episode of Svenya is Unreasonably Disgruntled About Books. And today I'm feeling particularly agitated because Time magazine just released a list of their 100 best YA books of all time. Now, they've done this before. They did this with fantasy in November, and the list was relatively poorly received because it was sloppy and haphazardly done, and there were holes. The fantasy readership community poked through it immediately. And you would think that Time had learned their lesson, and yet here we are. So you want to talk about YA, huh? Well, there's an immediate problem, which is that YA isn't really that easily defined. It's not really a genre. And if you look into the history of YA, it becomes pretty clear why not. There have always been books written for older children, or young adults, as we're now calling them. But the birth of the modern term YA, especially in publishing and book marketing, didn't come about until the late 90s with the publication of what? What cultural cornerstone? That's right, Harry Potter. When Harry Potter came out, the entire world lost its mind. People were lining up at bookstores, people were dodging spoilers. It was like a whole cultural event every time a book was published. And the entire industry was completely shaken up. They were like, we've never seen this happen when we published a book before. I guess these kids between the ages of 12 and 17, they're actually a prime readership and we should be marketing more aggressively to them. Harry Potter ended up being a $25 billion franchise with $8 billion of revenue coming from the books alone. So everyone looked to Scholastic and was like, whatever they did, we need to do that now. And so they dug into their backlogs and they pulled out a whole bunch of old series and books that had young people at the center, and they slapped fancy covers on them and they called them YA. This is how you have His Dark Materials in the YA section, even though it's a very thinly veiled critique on organized religion. But then you also have stories like The Wheel of Time being branded as YA for a while, or the Mistborn series by Sanderson. That happened a little later, but still, publishers are so keen to get in on this readership because there's such a huge market for it. And that's what Harry Potter did for it. YA existed before Harry Potter, right? With things like Narnia and A Wrinkle in Time. It just wasn't a cultural cornerstone. It wasn't the market that publishing was most eager to capitalize upon. And then you have this rise in the dystopian era. You have the Hunger Games and spin-offs like Divergent. You have Twilight and all of the paranormal YA. And suddenly you have this whole spectrum of books that fall under this broad category of young adult. Books that have young adults at the center. And since then, the paranormal subgenre has died out. We no longer see dystopians published with the velocity that they were being published in 2010, but this broader term YA has remained. And so if we think about YA, it's not a genre, because Twilight and the Hunger Games, they're not in the same genre. One of them is a dystopian and one of them is a paranormal romance. But there's something that connects them, and that's the age that they're being marketed to. If YA is only a marketing scheme, how do you determine what a good YA book is? Is it a book that sold millions and millions of copies and got an adaptation that was a box office smash and was a cultural reset? Or is it a book that completely redefined what YA could even mean? I would say both of these. What I would say it definitely is not is books selected by YA authors that they think are great. And yet that is how Time has curated this list. And that's the big problem with it. Instead of having someone who is deeply connected to the YA genre, examining the history of it and understanding the influences of different texts and how they shaped and molded the way that books have been presented to young adults and children over the past, 30 years. They went to a group of 5 authors who have written for young adults, and they asked them to nominate their favorite books in YA. And so of course they nominated their own books, and they nominated the books that they thought were super cool. But that's not a list of the 100 best YA book. And so you have 5 Nicola Yoon books on this list because she was on the panel. But were any of her books a cultural reset? I'm waiting. And it's absolutely infuriating because they didn't even take the time to define what YA is at the beginning of the article. They just said, well, of course we have the definitive list because we asked some authors. And then they just go in chronological order, starting with Little Women, which is a bizarre choice for YA, but I'll take it. There's young women in it. And then they just list a whole bunch of books that they liked. And there are groups of titles that are noticeably missing. There's not a single Cassandra Clare book, and I'm biased, right? I love Cassandra Clare. But you have to admit that an author who consistently publishes a book every single year that upon launch is a #1 New York Times bestseller in YA, she is kind of YA royalty. She's written some of the best books in YA according to the readers because they keep buying her books 10 years after her debut. But no, not a single Cassandra Clare. There's no Sarah J. Maas, who's also sold almost 10 million copies of her books, not mentioned. Then you don't even have Harry Potter. The book that created this marketing genre isn't even mentioned. Like 10 Nicola Yoon books, but not a single Harry Potter book. Not even a mention to J.K. Rowling. And I understand that J.K. Rowling is controversial and we don't want to associate ourselves with her. Fine. But her books empirically created the genre that you're trying to rank right now. And so to not include that is incredibly remiss. Like, it's just disrespectful of the genre. You have no Twilight or any of its weird spin-offs like Hush Hush or Fallen, and you don't have any other paranormal romances like The Vampire Academy. You don't have Aragon, which has a boy at the center, which is quite rare for YA fantasy. You don't have Ender's Game, which is a cornerstone of YA sci-fi. You don't have the Lunar Chronicles. These are all books that in the past 5 to 7 years have had a huge cultural impact on young people, but none of that's being mentioned. Those are all sci-fi, fantasy, speculative fiction works. What about contemporaries? Like, oh, this list is probably just filled with a whole bunch of contemporary YA then. Well, yeah, you have All the Boys I've Loved Before because Jenny Han was also on the committee. But you also are missing things like The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which was a hugely influential YA book and completely redefined what kinds of things you could be writing about in YA. 13 Reasons Why, The Outsiders, you don't have. All of these absolute classics in the genre that when you go up to someone and you say, tell me about YA, they're gonna say Harry Potter and Twilight. And the fact that they don't have these on this list makes me think, why are you even writing this? Why are you making this list? They're a huge publication with so much weight coming behind what they say. If they say this is the best in YA, that's what people who are skeptical about the genre are going to see as the best. And that's really damaging because there are people that are really, really skeptical about the genre. People who think that it holds absolutely no merit and that people who read it, specifically the young girls who read it, are wasting their time. And so if they look at this list and they see a whole bunch of books that they deem are filler books, then what? Then they feel as though they have a cemented reason to hate whole marketing genre because they have proof from Time magazine, a pretty reputable publication. Because there is unfortunately a really big problem with people demonizing YA, with people saying that it's only something that vapid young girls read and that it's problematic because everyone's not like other girls and you have these strong female characters who are like so dumb. For this list to clearly not understand the gravity that it's holding when it goes out into the world and it's telling a much wider audience this is the best of what YA has to offer. The fact that this list is so poorly curated speaks volumes to why they were doing this, which was a vanity project for the 5 authors who they asked to be on this committee. It makes me wonder how many of these books were put on this list because publishers paid for the promotion to be in this list. And maybe that's not the case. Maybe these 5 authors that were on the committee really truly believe that these are the most influential texts in YA. The chance of that being true just feels like it's so slim. When I first saw this list, I made a whole reaction video to it and I decided not to post it because it was just me being flabbergasted for 15 minutes. Me reading through the titles and being absolutely shocked at the choices and the choices that they didn't make and the statements that they were making about YA with this list. I just think it's really sad because there is so much value in YA. Anyway, This made me really mad because I feel like I want to be defensive of the YA genre because I've been judged for my reading taste. I've been told that it's dumb and trashy and that I'm wasting my time when I'm doing something that's fun. And that's really disheartening to have my intelligence and self-worth tied into what I read because of the misconceptions about the term YA. And for Time to completely disregard all of the problems with YA and put out this half-assed list, it's just really disheartening. So all in all, check out the list for yourselves. Maybe you totally disagree. Maybe you think that all of the cornerstones of YA were included. Who knows? Maybe all of your favorite books were on this list, in which case, brava, according to Time, you have immaculate taste. Even though this made me kind of sad, I had a great time because I was hanging out with you. So thank you so much for sticking around. Let me know what YA book you would put on this list down below. And as per always, I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys next time. Bye.